I was the one who stayed. Through his darkest hours, I held his hand, wiped his tears, and reminded him of who he was when he forgot. Everyone else left when things got hard. But not me. I believed in him when no one else did. When he couldn't walk after the accident, I fed him, bathed him, carried his pride in my pocket, so he wouldn't have to feel weak. I told myself this was love. That love meant sacrifice. I never imagined he'd forget the woman who kept him alive. Back then, we lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment. The peeling walls, the cheap coffee, the endless hospital bills. I didn't care. He was breathing, and that was enough. He used to look at me like I was his anchor. "You're my reason," he whispered once as I held his trembling hand during another long night of pain. I took those words and built a future around them. I imagined us climbing out of the wreckage together. What I didn't know was that once he stood tall again, he'd leave me buried in the debris. The first time I noticed the shift, it was subtle. A missed call, a shorter kiss, a colder tone. He started staying out late. "Working," he said, but I saw the way his eyes stopped meeting mine. I saw the relief on his face when I stopped asking questions. I chalked it up to stress. I told myself he needed space. I didn't want to believe he was drifting, because if I believed that, then I'd have to admit that all I'd given had been for nothing. It wasn't until I saw the text on his phone that the illusion shattered. "Can't wait to see you again," face blowing a kiss. It read. Not from a coworker, not from a friend, but from someone new. Someone who didn't know the man I bathed when he couldn't move. Someone who hadn't held him through night terrors or fought with doctors to keep him alive. My hands trembled as I read it. My breath caught. And in that moment, I realized I had been replaced. Erased. Forgotten. I didn't confront him that night. I watched him laugh across the table, eyes full of charm, pretending to still be mine. And I sat there in silence, swallowing my pain like poison. I let him speak lies while I played the fool, because I needed time. Time to grieve the fantasy. Time to plan my escape. Time to reclaim the pieces of myself I'd handed him like offerings. That night, I slept beside a stranger. And in the quiet, I whispered to myself, this is where the Real story begins. The next morning, I woke up early, made his coffee, like always, kissed his cheek, like always. He smiled, unaware that it was the last time I'd serve him anything but silence. That day, I packed my things slowly, methodically. I left no note, no goodbye, just a bare closet and the ring he gave me, resting in the sink. I walked out with my head high, even as my heart crumbled, because I knew if I stayed, I'd disappear. And I wasn't ready to die for a man who'd already buried me. The world outside didn't stop for my pain. Rent was due. Work had to be done. But for the first time, I wasn't surviving for someone else. I was surviving for me. I moved in with an old college friend, Lena. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me tea, let me cry, and reminded me who I used to be. You were fire before him, she said. You'll be fire after. I didn't believe her then, but something in me stirred. A flicker, a spark, and I held on to it. I started writing again. Just small things, journal entries, poems, late-night rants. But it helped. Each word pulled a piece of me back. I took long walks alone. I listened to music I used to love. I cooked for myself without rushing. And slowly, the silence stopped feeling so lonely. It started feeling like peace. For so long, my life had been about his recovery, his dreams, his needs. I had no idea how loud my own voice was, until I finally let it speak. Months passed. He didn't reach out. Not once. No call. No apology. He moved on like I never existed. And that hurt more than the betrayal, because it proved what I'd feared all along. I was just a chapter in his story. A stepping stone. He got better, stronger, and I was left behind, like a crutch he no longer needed. But instead of chasing closure, I chased something else. Myself, my future, my healing, because I didn't want him back. I wanted me back. Lena helped me find a therapist. And I won't lie, healing wasn't pretty. It was rage, grief, emptiness. It was nights where I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I mattered at all. But I kept going, session after session, layer after layer, until one day I looked in the mirror and didn't see the woman who begged to be seen. I saw someone stronger, someone wiser, someone reborn. He may have forgotten me, but I had just remembered myself. I found a job at a local publishing firm. Nothing glamorous, just proofreading manuscripts. But it grounded me. Words had always been my safe place. And now, they became my ladder out of the pit he left me in. Each sentence I corrected, each comma I placed, it felt like stitching together my identity. My boss, Mr. Hahn, noticed my dedication. "You've got an eye for more than typos," he said one afternoon. "Ever considered writing something of your own?" I laughed then, but the idea rooted itself deep. I started spending evenings drafting short stories. They were angry at first, raw, messy, tales of forgotten women, of unspoken pain, of survival in silence. Lena read them all. "This is gold," she told me. "You don't even realize how powerful this is." But I wasn't ready to share them with the world. Not yet. They were too personal, too real. Still, every keystroke felt like armor. The more I wrote, the less haunted I became. Until one night I dreamed of him, and I didn't wake up crying. It was a chance encounter that shifted everything. At a networking event Mr. Hahn dragged me to, I saw him. My ex standing by the bar, dressed in polished arrogance, his arms slung casually around a woman who wasn't me. She laughed like she knew him, but she didn't. Not like I did. Our eyes met. His smile faltered, just for a second, long enough for me to see it, the recognition, the guilt, the realization that I wasn't broken, buried, or gone. I was thriving, and he hadn't seen it coming. He approached me, of course. Men, like him, always circle back when the glow returns. "Wow," he said, eyes scanning me like he had a right. "You look different." I smiled, calm and composed. "Yes," I said, voice like steel. "Healing tends to do that." He laughed nervously, tried to joke. "I never expected to see you here." I tilted my head. "That's because you never looked for me." And then I walked away, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his own making. After that night, I knew it was time. I pulled together my stories and sent them to a small independent publisher. I didn't expect much, but weeks later, I got the call. They wanted to publish my collection. "Your voice is striking," the editor said. "Honest, vulnerable, fierce." I cried in the bathroom at work that day, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of reclaiming myself. That book wasn't just pages. It was my proof that I survived, that I mattered, that I was unforgettable. Word spread quickly. Local interviews, online features. People connected with my words in ways I never imagined. Messages poured in from women who saw themselves in my stories. "Thank you," they wrote. "You said what I never could." For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't need anyone's validation, especially not his. But I knew deep down he'd see my name. He'd read my words. And he'd realized too late the woman he abandoned had become untouchable. One afternoon, I got an email. His name at the top, the subject line blank. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was one sentence. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. I closed it. No reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't owe him anything. Not even closure. That chapter was over. And I wasn't about to rewrite it for a man who had his chance and burned it. Silence was my final word. I took a trip after that. Just me, my journal, and the open sky. Mountains, rivers, long walks with no destination. And somewhere between sunrises and quiet coffee shops, I forgave myself. Not for loving him, but for forgetting myself in the process. I held that girl, the one who stayed through his storms, and I told her, "You didn't fail. You were brave. You were love." And then I let her go, because the woman I had become didn't need to cling to the past to know her worth. When I returned home, there was peace. Not excitement, not drama, just peace. I'd found my rhythm, my voice, my life, and I'd done it without revenge, without begging, without chasing ghosts. He was part of my story, yes, but no longer the author. I had taken the pen back. I had rewritten the ending. And now, every step I took was mine. Fully, freely, fiercely. People asked me if I'd ever see him again. I always answered the same. Maybe, but if he reaches out, he won't find me where he left me. I'm not there anymore. Because the truth is, when someone forgets the woman who saved their life, they don't deserve the woman who built a new one. And I had become the one he could never reach again. A few months later, my book launched officially. A small venue, soft lighting, rows of strangers waiting to hear the story behind the pages. I stood at the front, heart pounding, hands cold. But when I opened my mouth, the words flowed. I didn't talk about him by name. I didn't need to. I talked about grief, about giving too much, about what it means to rebuild from ashes you didn't burn. And when I looked out into the audience, I saw tears, nods, silent understanding. I wasn't alone anymore. I never had been. After the event, a young woman approached me. "I left last week," she whispered, "after I read your story." She was trembling. I reached out, took her hand. "You're not weak for walking away," I said. "You're strong for knowing when to stop bleeding for someone who won't stop stabbing." She cried, and I held her. And in that moment, I understood something deeper. My pain had purpose. My story wasn't just survival. It was a torch, and I would pass it on to anyone still lost in the dark. Lena cried when she saw the final printed copy of the book. "You did it," she said, holding it like a sacred thing. "You turned heartbreak into art." We toasted with cheap wine and leftovers the way we always had. She'd been my constant, my witness, my mirror. "You saved me," I whispered to her. "You reminded me I was still here." And she shook her head, tears slipping down. "No," she said, "you saved yourself. I just held the light long enough for you to see the path." There were nights when memories tried to creep back in, nights when I heard his laughter in my dreams, or felt the ghost of his touch in the cold. But I stopped running from them. I welcomed them like old echoes. I sat with them, then gently closed the door, because they didn't control me anymore. I wasn't their prisoner. I was the warden now. And every time I chose to stay in the present, to love myself louder, the past lost its grip a little more. Opportunities kept coming. Interviews, podcast features, a panel on women reclaiming their narratives. It wasn't fame I craved, it was impact. I wanted women to know they weren't alone in their breaking, that they could rebuild. Stronger, wilder, free. I stopped hiding. I stopped apologizing. I wore red lipstick again. I laughed loudly. I danced in my kitchen. I said no when I meant it. And every time I honored myself, I killed the version of me that begged to be chosen by someone else. I bumped into his mother, once, outside a bookstore. She froze when she saw me, eyes wide. "You look incredible," she said, almost like an apology. I smiled, soft but firm. "I am." She hesitated, then added, "He's not doing well. He misses you." I looked her in the eye and said, "He misses who I used to be. But that woman doesn't exist anymore." She nodded slowly, tears in her lashes. "He'll regret it forever." I didn't say anything else. Because some truths don't need repeating. I dated again. Eventually. Carefully. Slowly. I wasn't looking to be saved. I'd already done that myself. I wanted connection, not validation. Love, not rescue. And the first time someone looked at me and said, "I admire your strength," instead of "You're too much," I cried. Not because I was in love, but because I finally believed I was lovable just as I am. Not for what I gave. Not for who I fixed. But for who I had become. Some nights I walk by the apartment where we used to live. The lights are different. The energy unfamiliar. But sometimes I stand outside for a moment just to remember. To honor the girl who lived inside that heartbreak and still found the courage to leave. I don't hate her for staying too long. I thank her for surviving, for learning, for becoming me. Because without her pain, I wouldn't have found this power. And without that fall, I wouldn't have learned to fly. I never posted about him. Never aired it out online. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about rising. And that silence, it was louder than anything I could have screamed. Because when you stop chasing people who forget you, you start attracting everything meant for you. And I was no longer begging to be chosen. I had chosen myself, and that changed everything. That became the beginning of everything new. They say heartbreak changes you. And they're right. It shattered me, but it also stripped away the illusions. It showed me what I was made of. It forced me to grow, to shed, to rise. And now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see damage. I see depth. I see fire. I see the woman no one can break again. Because once you've walked through hell and come out holding your own hand, no one can convince you that you need their love to feel whole. It was Lena who surprised me with the tattoo appointment. A reminder, she said, something permanent just for you. I chose a phoenix, small, elegant, rising from its own ashes, inked on my shoulder blade. As the needle buzzed, I didn't flinch. I welcomed the sting. It felt symbolic, like sealing the past, like declaring to the world, and myself, that I had been reborn not in spite of the fire, but because of it. I left that shop with more than ink. I left with a piece of armor etched under my skin. The media started calling me the silent voice of broken women. I never liked the label, but I understood what they meant. My words were echoing in places I'd never imagined. I was invited to speak at a university, ironically, the same one he had once dropped out of, the one I had worked 2 jobs to help him get into. Standing on that stage, looking out at eager young faces, I realized how far I'd come. He had used me as a stepping stone, but I'd become the whole damn mountain. There was something poetic about it, how life had looped around. The boy who once mocked my dreams now watched mine unfold in headlines. The man who dismissed my pain now read about it in bookstores. But none of this was for him. That was the difference. Everything I built was for the girl I used to be. For the girl who waited up nights, praying he'd come home sober. For the girl who covered his lies and carried his shame. For the girl who almost forgot she had a name. I got a message one morning from an old mutual friend. "He's spiraling," she said. "He talks about you a lot." I didn't ask for details. I didn't care. I wasn't cruel. I was indifferent. And that's the thing people never understand. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy. I didn't wish him harm. I just didn't wish him anything. I had no room for him in the life I had built. I had rooms filled with art, poetry, peace. No corners left for ghosts. My second book came faster, more intentional. Not stories of pain this time, but power. I called it The Woman Who Stayed Too Long. A reclamation, a roar. It hit bestseller lists in under a week. Bookstores filled their windows with it. Women came in droves, sharing their own stories. And every time one whispered, "This helped me leave," I knew I was doing what I was meant to do. My words were no longer a coping mechanism. They were a revolution. The more I healed, the more I loved being alone. I'd light candles in the evening, play soft music, pour a glass of wine, and write until dawn. My solitude wasn't lonely, it was sacred. I stopped fearing empty rooms. I stopped needing company to feel seen. I had become my own witness, my own muse, my own home. And in that stillness, I realized I had never truly known myself while I was with him. Now, every day was a new introduction to the woman I'd become. One night, while doing a panel on emotional resilience, someone asked, "Do you ever wish you could go back?" The room went silent. I paused, then smiled, only to hug the girl who didn't know her own worth. To tell her, one day he won't matter. One day you'll thank him for leaving. The audience clapped, but it wasn't for me. It was for every version of themselves they had abandoned in the name of love. And I felt it deep in my chest. The beauty of rising. He tried one last time. A letter, handwritten, mailed to the publisher's address. Apologies, regrets, that he never stopped loving me, that he was lost, that he needed help. I stared at the envelope for days before burning it, not in anger, but in release. His words didn't hold weight anymore. I didn't need to reopen wounds to prove I'd healed. The fire took it all, and I felt lighter, freer, like I'd finally closed the last door between us, for good. I visited my parents not long after. My mother hugged me tight. "You're glowing," she said, "happier than I've ever seen you." I smiled, truly smiled, because I finally know who I am. My father nodded, and he doesn't get to take credit for any of it. And they were right. My story had started with him, but it had never belonged to him. I was no longer the girl who needed saving. I had become the woman who saved herself. Sometimes I wonder what he tells people now. Maybe that I left too soon, that I changed, that I became cold. Let him craft whatever story helps him sleep at night. Because I know the truth. I lived it. I clawed my way out. I built this life brick by painful brick. And no version of his narrative can undo the empire I created from the rubble he left behind. I started hosting writing workshops, small groups at first. Women from all walks of life sat in circles, sharing pain they had buried for years. We didn't just write, we healed. Through every trembling sentence, every ink-stained confession, we stitched ourselves back together. I saw pieces of my past in their stories, and they saw their future in mine. There was no hierarchy of hurt, just a chorus of survival. We weren't just reclaiming our voices, we were learning how to roar again. One day, a woman about my age stayed behind after a session. She looked nervous, clutched a worn notebook to her chest. "He hurt me," she said, voice shaking. And I stayed because I thought loving him harder would fix it. I nodded, understanding too well. "We were taught that love means sacrifice," I said, "but love shouldn't mean surrender." Her eyes welled up. "Thank you for saying what no one else did." And as she left, shoulders a little straighter, I realized I had become what I once needed. A magazine ran a profile on me titled From Left Behind to Leading Voice. The photo shoot felt surreal. Soft lighting, sleek wardrobe, a confident smile I barely recognized as my own. But it wasn't vanity. It was victory. The girl in those pictures wasn't pretending anymore. She wasn't shrinking to fit someone else's narrative. She had become the author of her own. And as I flipped through the pages, I felt pride, not in the fame, but in the fact that I hadn't just survived him. I had outgrown him. At a coffee shop a few blocks from where we once lived, I overheard two women talking about my book. "She's so raw, so real," one said. "You can feel everything she went through." I didn't interrupt. I just sat there, sipping my coffee, heart full. They had no idea I was the woman behind the words. And I didn't need them to. That moment wasn't about recognition. It was about resonance. My story had stopped being mine alone. It had become a mirror for others. My ex tried again, indirectly. He posted a long, vague caption on social media about losing a good woman and learning too late. Messages from mutuals trickled in, wondering if I'd seen it. I had, but I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Growth had given me the gift of silence. I wasn't here to perform pain. I wasn't here to be baited into closure. I had already closed the book. He was just now realizing he was no longer a chapter in mine. There were still bad days. Grief doesn't vanish. It evolves. But even on the worst of them, I didn't break the way I used to. I cried, sure. I got angry, but I didn't crumble. I didn't reach for him. I reached inward. I journaled. I walked. I held space for myself the way I once held it for him. And slowly, the ache dulled. The waves got smaller. Until one day, I noticed my healing didn't look like forgetting him. It looked like remembering me. An old friend reached out. One who had disappeared when things got messy. "I didn't know how to be there for you," she said. "But I see you now, and I'm so proud." I didn't hold a grudge. I had outgrown bitterness. I welcomed her back, not because I needed her, but because I no longer needed to protect my pain like a secret. Healing had made me softer, not weaker. Forgiveness was no longer about them. It was a gift I gave myself to move lighter. I traveled to Paris that year, alone. Something I'd always dreamed of, but he had said was impractical. I walked the Seine at sunset, took photos of the sky, wrote poems on napkins in little cafes. And when someone asked who I was traveling with, I smiled and said, "Just me." No shame, no sadness, just joy. That trip wasn't a getaway, it was a declaration that I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was already whole, more than whole. I was radiant. Back home, my apartment had changed, not in furniture, but in feel. It had gone from refuge to celebration. Plants thrived in the windows, books piled on every table, candles half burned, music always playing. It smelled like lavender and safety. It felt like mine. And every time I walked in, I whispered, "Thank you." To the walls, to the silence, to the woman who finally made a home out of herself. I didn't decorate it for guests. I decorated it for the girl who used to feel invisible. That's the thing about rebirth. It's not loud. It's not fireworks. It's subtle. It's choosing peace over chaos. It's dancing barefoot to your favorite song. It's saying no without guilt. It's looking in the mirror and smiling, not because you're perfect, but because you're finally free. And that freedom, that quiet, steady freedom, that's the most powerful kind of revenge there is. I opened a small foundation, the Ash Project, dedicated to women rebuilding after emotional devastation. We offered counseling, creative therapy, and career mentorship. It wasn't charity. It was a tribute to the woman I used to be. To the thousands like her, sitting in silence, thinking no one understood. We understood. Every tear they cried, we'd already wept. Every bruise, every betrayal, we'd lived it. But we were still standing. Stronger, louder, fiercer. The Ash Project wasn't about fixing broken women. It was about reminding them they were never broken to begin with. One day, I got a letter, not from him, but his sister. She thanked me, said she saw what he did to me, and always hated staying silent. "You didn't deserve any of it," she wrote. "I wish I'd been brave enough to tell you then." I cried reading it, not for the apology, but for the girl who waited so long to hear one. It came too late to change the past, but it was just in time to remind me that even unspoken truths have weight, and sometimes they find their way home. I began to feel something I hadn't allowed myself to in years: pride. Not performative, not for applause. Quiet, steady pride. The kind that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you and turning it into gold. The kind that wraps around your shoulders like a shawl and whispers, "You did it." I no longer needed revenge to feel powerful. I no longer needed validation to feel worthy. The woman I had become was enough, more than enough. She had risen, not despite the fire, but through it. I was asked to be on a panel about transforming pain into purpose. The irony hit me as I stepped onto that stage. Years ago, I was just a shadow behind a man's success. Now I was the story, the message, the force. I looked out over the crowd and saw eyes full of recognition, of hope. And I spoke, not like a victim, not like a survivor, but like a creator. "We don't rise by pretending we were never broken," I said. "We rise by choosing to rebuild anyway." Occasionally, I'd still see his name in headlines: minor scandals, failed ventures. A man chasing attention with empty hands. There was no satisfaction in his downfall, just clarity. He had never grown. He had only consumed. And I had spent years feeding him pieces of myself, thinking love meant hunger. But I knew better now. Real love doesn't drain you. It doesn't demand your silence or your spine. It holds you, builds you. And when you give it to yourself first, no one can take it away again. On the anniversary of the day I left him, I lit a single candle. Not in mourning, but in celebration. I wrote myself a letter, thanking the younger me for walking out that door, for choosing uncertainty over abuse, truth over illusion. I read it out loud. My voice didn't shake. "You did it," I said. "You became her." The room was quiet, peaceful, and in that silence, I finally felt what I'd been chasing all these years. Not closure, but peace. And peace was louder than any apology could ever be. People often ask if I ever loved him. And the answer is yes, I did. Deeply, stupidly, completely. But that love taught me everything. It taught me where my boundaries should be. It taught me what I will never accept again. And most importantly, it taught me that loving someone else should never come at the cost of loving yourself. That kind of love isn't romantic. It's ruinous. And I had spent enough of my life in ruins. I was done building temples on fault lines. A young writer messaged me recently, terrified of leaving her relationship. "How did you know it was time?" she asked. I told her the truth. The moment I realized staying would cost me more than leaving. It didn't make her decision easier, but it gave her a mirror. That's all I ever wanted to be. Proof that survival is possible. That you can lose everything and still bloom. That endings don't mean you're done. Sometimes they're just your life's first honest sentence. My story is no longer about him. It never really was. He was just the detour I had to take to find the road back to myself. Every betrayal, every lie, every wound, he handed me bricks, and I built a kingdom. I wear my past like armor, not shame. And when people say, "You've changed," I smile. Because yes, I have. I've become someone he can never touch, never reach, never dim. That, to me, is the sweetest revenge of all. And so I walk forward, head high, heart whole, past behind me. I don't look back, not out of spite, but because there's nothing left to find. I am not her anymore. I am everything she dreamed of becoming. Strong, free, glowing, reborn. The woman he forgot. She's unforgettable now. And he'll spend the rest of his life chasing ghosts. But I live. Fully, fiercely, loudly, and for the first time, entirely for me.